This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Brighton podcast on the GSPN network. I am your host today, Richard Parr, and it is, of course, Tactics Tuesday. That means we're going to talk about how we absolutely ripped Everton apart on Saturday, 3-0. If you didn't know how we did that, go back and listen to our podcast on Monday where we talk about how we were absolutely brilliant and how we're going to win the league. 200 to 1, according to odds makers. Well, look, we've got so much to cover today. I am delighted to say that I am rejoined by Joe and by Jamie. Guys, how you doing today?
Yeah, all good, mate. How we doing?
Yeah, man, I'm absolutely fantastic right now. I'm living it up. We're living it up.
We're living it up under Fabian Hurzeler's style of football. There was a famous German manager on Merseyside the last few years who would give it the large to his fans after they won a big game. And that was, of course, Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool. But who was doing it on Merseyside on Saturday? It was Fabian Hurzeler after a tactical masterclass at Goodison Park. Gents, let's talk about that. Jamie, what did you see that you were impressed with how we set up under Hurzeler on Saturday?
Well, I thought it was quite interesting in terms of that we started just as an overall piece. We'll come on to specific sections in due time, but I think it was interesting that we set up 4-2-3-1 to begin with, which we weren't expecting when we were speaking about the tactics when we discussed that on the other pod last week. We thought it was going to be a 4-1-4-1, so that was an interesting bit. I like the fact that he still seemed keen to allow Danny Welbeck to drop deep and still kept our wingers high and wide like we saw and like them basically running at defenders. But yeah, I thought overall we like it's clear as well that he's content in keeping possession. That's what he wants, is to keep possession. And we said it in the last pod about the Olays coming in the 73rd minute. So that was playing into the hands of the Brighton players and Hurzeler's tactics, just keeping the ball, playing it around, giving it to Whiffer, seeing what he can kind of do with it. But yeah, that's what I thought of it.
And Joe, a lot of the play starts from the back, a little bit like De Zerbi. What did you make of us as a defensive unit?
Do you know what? I think overall, in terms of the build-up from the back, I think it's obviously clear that he wants the identity is to build up from the back. One thing that I do like is that it's not rushed into the middle of the park as much as it was under De Zerbi. I like the idea of being able to, if you need to, go to the fullbacks, especially if a team's playing a narrow formation, exploit where that space is, being able to build up from the back, then play through the middle if you need to do that. I thought the line would be a bit higher. It was still quite high, but it was sort of like that middle between sort of like a mid block to a high block, if you know what I mean. And I think the playing out from the back suits us, but the only thing is that you don't want it to be. You need to be patient, and it is risk taking. There's obviously there's a higher risk in playing out from the back anyway, but playing out from the back and rushing it is even higher risk. But playing it out from the back in a calculated way is something that I definitely enjoyed watching.
I've got to say, I thought Jason Steele had a very good game in goal, particularly with the ball at his feet. He was very calm. Mm-hmm. I don't think he lost possession. I can't remember a big moment where he lost possession. And I thought he seamlessly was back in the side. Of course, Bart Verbruggen is currently injured after a really good spell in the Euros. I think the biggest question mark when it comes to tactically for Brighton in defence for this first game was the decision to play Jack Hinchelwood at left back. Now, Jamie, we've spoken quite a bit about Hurzeler's tactics in pre-season and the fact that Hurzeler at St. Pauli played back three with one of the centre-halves moving forward into midfield. We haven't seen that so far in pre-season. I'm not sure if it's personnel. I'm not sure if it's because of the Premier League. but he went with a back four. And I think everyone was quite surprised that if he's going to go with a back four, why didn't he play Barco? Now, he's played Jack Hinchelwood, who we've spoken about on this podcast, who we think is going to be a very good player, should perhaps be in the side, maybe ahead of Veltman, is probably more of a natural midfielder. But he went in at left back. What did you make of his performance? And do you think tactically that's what Hurzeler wanted from him?
I think Hinchelwood didn't have the best game. I won't lie. I thought against Jack Harrison, well, I think Jack Harrison got the better of him. I'll put it out there. I think the crosses, if there was any good execution from Harrison in terms of the balls into the box or any crosses that he made, I think it could have been disastrous for Brighton. But I feel he didn't look completely comfortable at left back. I saw him at right back last season. He looked much better. I think the reason he's opted, and we were speaking about it when we were watching the game, the reason he opted for Hinchelwood at left back instead of a Valentin Barco is the fact that physicality in the league, Barco is quite small, but he's a natural left back. And I don't think he would have been done as much because at some points in the game, I think there was a fourth minute, he was kind of on skates, Hinchelwood. So yeah, I wasn't too sure, and I don't think Hurzeler got the most or got what he wanted out of Hinchelwood in terms of Hinchelwood barely got in the game in terms of like playing out from the back. The only time he really got offensively in the game was when the sending off happened and he had much more freedom and they had to kind of sit back. But overall, I don't think it was the best Hinchelwood performance. I don't know what you think about that.
See, I think Barco, the reason he didn't play is because I actually think Barco is more offensive. He's more attacking than Hinchelwood.
Yeah.
And I think he wanted someone who is just going to kind of almost be... This is probably before you guys' era, but almost like when Jamie Carragher used to have to play left back in the season that Liverpool got to the UEFA Cup final or whatever it was against Alaves, and wouldn't actually go past the halfway line. He had to come in and just defend. And I think we saw in pre-season Belieber play left back, but they wouldn't come in midfield and help out Weaver or whoever it would be in midfield and become that extra double pivot or even a treble pivot, a bit like Man City do with John Stones or Rico Lewis. And I didn't see any of that. Am I missing anything, Joe?
I don't know. You have to take into consideration, obviously, like you said earlier, personnel, and you need to take into consideration your opposition as well. I definitely agree that I think Hinchelwood was in there mainly for the physical aspect, but I also think there's a side note of him being in there because of his ability to play. I'm not saying that Barco doesn't have that, but like you said, Barco's obviously that has the ability to bomb up and down, but if you wanted him to play inverted, he doesn't really have that. Whereas obviously with Belieber, then he could obviously come in there. I feel like Milner was in there for a similar reason. I know that's obviously a different position, but I feel like he was in there expected to come and drop in and help with her. And I think that potentially, just because of what was happening in the game with Jack Harrison, I feel like you didn't see there was loads of diagonal balls out wide. And I feel like if those balls were happening and Hinchelwood found himself caught in that sort of half, okay, I need to go out there now. Or if he doesn't go out, then we're going to get stretched because Dunk has to go out there. And you definitely don't want Dunk to be going out there. So, I don't know. I just think that it was contextual based on the game, but I also think that it's something that we probably will see at some point, game dependent potentially.
I love that we're picking holes into a clean sheet against the side we've absolutely battled. I think that's where we are as a club. This is what we're looking for. We're looking for excellence. And you know what? We're going to have more excellent, great content on this podcast, on the Daily Brighton podcast, in just a few minutes after this short break. Do you have a story to tell that the world needs to hear? Have you struggled with reaching new audiences who are engaged with your story? It might be time for you to start a podcast. Let me tell you about a platform we use here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, Zencastr makes it easy to start a high-quality podcast built for growth from day one. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes ums, ahs, you knows, and 22 other speech patterns, Zencastr makes it super easy to start a podcast that sounds great. Ready to tell your story? Check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. Welcome back to the Daily Brighton podcast. I'm Richard Parr here with my guys Jamie and Joe. We're talking tactics. Why? Because it's Tuesday, of course, and Brighton winning 3-0 against Everton at Goodison Park on Saturday. We've gone through Hurzeler's ideas. We've gone through the defence. Now let's have a look at the midfield. Brighton playing with three midfielders. They had Mats Wiefer alongside James Milner, with João Pedro in there as well. Jamie, did that combination work, do you think?
Well, I first want to start off by saying a solid debut for Mats Wiefer. I thought he was the most impressive out of the three by a long way. I thought he was comfortable on the ball. He did have one minor blip leading to the penalty, which wasn't a penalty in the end, but that was basically the only foot that he actually stepped wrong, I felt. I like the fact he could clearly play with the ball, was calm on the ball. We saw that in the lead up to the second goal, intercepting the ball and then playing it to Welbeck. And then this is where I think it went downhill. In terms of Milner, the question is he still good enough? There were a couple of rash moments from Milner in terms of committing a foul, or the slip we spoke about yesterday's podcast, the slip, where he just isn't aware of the ball when Van Hecker's wanting to play it to him. He's trying to direct traffic like an elder statesman that he is. But I feel like is he the answer going forward? And I don't think that is the answer going forward. I would still like us to sign another midfielder to go alongside Mats Wiefer rather than the 38-year-old James Milner.
And I think that's probably the plan. It was interesting there was no Belieber on the bench, because you would have thought maybe he would be an option. Billy Gilmore was on the bench. If he doesn't go to Napoli, is that a player they're thinking of? So I think there's kind of options there. But Joe, further up in the midfield, João Pedro was kind of playing in a 10, a little bit to the left. So I'm seeing Brighton at the moment are playing kind of Wiefer as the deepest, then Milner on the right, kind of one step up, and then João Pedro on the left, kind of two steps up, almost supporting the strikers. What did you make of not only João Pedro's performance, but as to whether he's the right man to be playing that role?
I think that for João Pedro, I think we spoke about it off camera. We said about how he seemed like he was. I said yesterday in the pod that I thought he was good. I thought he was good in terms of when he had the ball. I felt like something was going to happen. But I feel like because of Welbeck, he was so keen, and he was obviously doing it to a very good standard anyway, but he was obviously dropping into João Pedro's position. And I think that therein lies the sort of, you can see that obviously when he's sort of dropping off into that little half space in the left, that Welbeck's coming into the more of a central / right half space, is sort of like making sort of like floating tens in a way. I don't think that necessarily worked for João Pedro, because I feel like João Pedro needs a little bit more space around him to be able to maybe get the ball out wide, and then the ball can go into Welbeck. It is, of course, the first game of the season. It is a work in progress. We have to always remember this. And João Pedro easily has enough talent to be able to get into that role eventually and make it his own. I don't know whether it's something that's going to happen for the rest of the season, but I think there's obviously players who, so for example, Enciso, when he comes back, even Sarmiento, players like this, they're obviously waiting. They're licking their chops, waiting to see if they're going to get a shout. I think Enciso plays there personally. there's just so much. There's so much option, and they all give you something different. I think Enciso in that position gives you doesn't mind if Welbeck is dropping in there, whereas I feel like João Pedro does. But I don't know. I just think that when, for example, so I think that when he gets a bit more used playing that position, I feel like it's something that can work. But when currently, I don't think it worked massively. But 3-0 win doesn't really matter, does it?
No, it was absolutely sensational. We're going to take a very short break in just a moment. I do want to get one quick thought from both of you. Do we change the midfield personnel in any way against Manchester United on Saturday?
I would like to see. I actually quite liked the Billy Gilmore when he came on. The thing is, the links with other clubs, and will he start, or is that the reason he's not starting? And Belieber not being on the bench as well is kind of a question mark why he isn't on the bench. And I would like to see him, because there is promise there with Belieber as well. So I would like to see it. I basically wouldn't like to see Milner again. I think he is a bit.
Whatever. Ever again.
I hope that's not the clip we put on social.
Maybe not.
I never want to see him ever again.
I never want to see Milner again.
Not never again.
We win 3-0. He actually plays all right, but I never want to see that man again for the rest of my life.
Yeah, there are better options, definitely.
Joe, would you like to see that man again, or is this
I'm always willing to see James Milner, but I don't think he should start the next game. I think the best thing to do is to have Whiffer. I feel like if Belieber is about somewhere, if we can summon him back to the squad, then I'd obviously like to see him, because I'd like to see the work rate in there. But yeah, I'd keep it the same, bar Milner. But I want to see him again.
Yeah, I'd like to see the man again.
Yeah, I'd like to see him somewhere.
That was the 23rd season in a row that he's played in.
So LeBron James numbers.
I've been happy to see him for 23 years. I don't know about you, Jamie, but never mind. Well, look, we've got more to talk about, especially with our flying wingers. We were absolutely destroying it on the wings. There's not going to be too much for us to talk about as far as what they're doing, because what they're doing is electric. But we're going to learn a little bit more about Brighton's new signing, and that is up next. This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League football team, the Premier League, women's football, and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from and make us your first listen every day. Global Sports Podcast Network, every club, every day. Welcome back to the Daily Brighton podcast. It's Tactics Tuesday. I'm Richard here with Jamie and Joe. Now, we're called the Daily Brighton podcast, but I'll be honest, over the last week or so, we could also be called the Daily Minte podcast. And after Saturday, maybe the Daily Matoma podcast. So I don't think we need to go into too much detail about how our wingers are absolutely killing it. I think what I'd like to know more about us going forward is about our brand new player who could be in the side ahead of them, could be there joining them in support. Joe, tell us all about the amazing, the wonderful Brian Gruder.
So, the way that I'd like you guys listening and the people watching to imagine is a player that is quite similar in terms of style to Arda Güler, but maybe with more pace. He's probably a bit more direct as well, and so naturally gifted in terms of the technical ability side. I personally think that he was, because his name was floating around quite a lot, and I feel like with the amount of wingers that were already at the club, it was sort of like going quiet, and then it was getting brought up again, and then it just accelerated out of nowhere to being done. I think he was actually the top target for the wingers, because Minter obviously is a spectacular acquisition, but that is also a very opportunistic signing. With obviously Newcastle suffering from the PSR stuff and all of that, they needed to get rid of someone. They decided that they wanted to keep Jacob Murphy, but I guess you're not going to get much money for him. So yeah, I think he can play in multiple positions, and he can play basically across all of that front three if we are doing a 4-2-3-1. So I think once he gets up to speed, someone could potentially lose their place because, like you said, Rich, before we went on air, Hurzeler is very, very excited about this guy. Very, very excited. And if all you have to do is just type his name on Twitter, don't even watch compilations because everyone looks good in compilations. I think I might even have one out there somewhere. But just look at what people are just saying about him. People are saying, oh, Brighton have got Gruder, other teams are in trouble. They're already in trouble because Minte is having their way with anyone he wants. Danny Welbeck is moving like prime R9 up front, and Matoma is back to his best. But it's someone who we should be very excited for. That's all I'm going to say.
I love Welbeck, but you did lose me at prime R9. I saw prime R9.
Prime R9 is my favourite ever footballer as well.
Prime R9 is sensational. Ronaldo. Yeah, Brian Gruder, 25 million deal according to the BBC. Played for Mainz last season, 28 appearances. He got a few goals, a few assists, and was in the Germany squad, training with the Germany squad, of course, before the Euros. He looks a very exciting prospect. So many options there, Jamie. What have you made of us going forward? Do you see any changes moving forward? Not just in personnel, but just in our build-up play at all?
No, I think the build-up play, what I liked and where I thought we were most dominant on the weekend was the fact that we played nice quick passes out to the wingers who, like I said earlier, high and wide, keep them there, and then just allow them the freedom to just run at defenders. And then they can go, well, we saw with Minter, they can go either right or left. And it's, I think, in terms of just keeping them there, just giving the ball to them quick. Because the one thing we didn't mention on yesterday's podcast was the fourth goal, which is where I thought really highlighted everything that we do well as a club. We won the ball back, and then there were literally 3 passes from Gilmour to Adingra across to Yari, which unfortunately for Yari, that didn't stand, but by centimeters as well. But that is where I think we're the strong, or where our biggest strength is attacking at pace, and we've just got to carry on doing that. Just get the ball out to the wingers and allow them to fly.
Ayari, of course, had that goal chalked off late on. He's looking to try to make his impact in the team this season. Joe, what did you make of the substitutions that Hurzeler made? Were they the right ones, and were they done at the right time? Did we learn much about that from Saturday?
To be honest, I think the overwhelming, and I also share the opinion, the overwhelming consensus is that the substitutions were really smart. I thought bringing on Gilmour to add more control when you're in that choppy period because there are always going to be points where they're sort of going to be pressing to get back into the game. Bringing him on for the control is such a perfect substitution. With Adingra, obviously that was forced, but it's like for like anyway. Ayari as well is so when you bring on Ayari, it's tired legs at the back for them because they were getting run ragged pretty much all game. So the press can essentially continue at the level that you need it to be at, and they're also pressing players that are tired from the whole game anyway. So I think the substitutions were perfect. Personally, I don't really see anything wrong with them.
You're nodding your head, Jamie.
Yeah, I thought. I mean, we spoke about this. Is really highlights how good Brighton are and how good our recruitment have been. We took off Minter, who looked extremely promising, obviously because of the concussion fears, and then we were able to bring on Adingra. And when Adingra came on, and we spoke about this on the combined lineup and our ideal lineup, I've put forward the name of playing Adingra on the right, and it just the talent is there, and we all kind of got to see it when he finally did come on. It wasn't ever a drop off. You see so many clubs when they bring on a sub, and it's a massive drop off from who they've actually just taken off. Ours seem like they actually work every time. There is no drop off in midfielders, and that is one of the good things about having about 8 right wingers. So there we go.
So many options. Well, gents, thank you so much for your time today. We've ran out of time on Tactics Tuesday. We could cover so much more, and that's what's unreal about having a daily Brighton podcast. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button. You're going to get these podcasts every single day, Monday through Friday, talking all things the Seagulls, all things the Albion. Of course, if you've got any thoughts on anything we've said today, give us a message on the Twitter. What's the Twitter, Joe? At GSPN Brighton. Don't worry. Keeping you on your toes.
There you go, mate.
Jamie, what's the Instagram?
It's GSPN_Brighton.
And does anyone know the TikTok?
The same as the Instagram, GSPN_Brighton.
I settled these up, by the way, and I've absolutely lost.
Anyway, that's where you can follow us, where you can learn more about what we're up to. This has been Tactics Tuesday, of course. Listen to us tomorrow. It's Wildcard Wednesday. Anything can happen. Who knows? Thank you so much for your time, Joe.
No problem at all. Thank you,
Jamie.
Thank you very much.
I've been Richard Parr, and you've been listening to the Daily Brighton Podcast. Goodbye.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.